Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be painting a low tide seascape very loosely using the wet in wet technique and a limited palette of 3 colours. I'm starting off just using mixtures of Venetian red and Prussian blue mixed with a lot of water. I'm brushing it across my page to give myself a really nice subtle but light sky wash and the basis for my beach. This time I haven't pre-wet the paper, I've just allowed my wash to wet the paper all over, sweeping the brush backwards and forwards and allowing the paint then to run so that I've got a really nice but subtle graduated wash with a few little bits of unpainted paper bottom right, which will hopefully give some hints of the sea and the low tide area of the beach. Once the wash starts to run down the page, I'll turn my board and you can see now that the wash is still running, but it's flattening things out a bit. I should get quite a nice even sky, and if any areas dry a little bit quicker, because I'm using my central heating at the moment so it's quite warm, I can just spray it with a water spray and that gently encourages the wash to continue to run. And then I'll turn it back round again as soon as it's stabilised a bit and I'm happy with the way the wash looks, and I'll use a clean, almost dry but damp brush, a thirsty brush, to just lift out any beads of water that have pooled up along edges so that I don't get runbacks, and then clean the brush out, run it through the picture horizontally to create just a very, very faint horizon line. Now that I'm happy with my basic wash, my sky wash, I'm not going to touch it. I want to leave it nice and fresh like that, so I'll lay the board flat and let it dry. I'll come back as soon as it's dry and continue with the painting. It's dried nice and cleanly. It's a little bit washed out here because it's midday and the sun's coming in through the windows, but it's got really nice sort of pinky grey and blue, very pale blue shades. So I've mixed up sort of a bluish mixture using those 2 colours, Venetian red, you can use light red if you don't have Venetian red, and Prussian blue, and using my flat brush I'm painting in just a very thin distant headland across the horizon line. And then drawing that brush down, creating just a bit more of a beach. Sweeping the brush horizontally from side to side in different sort of thicknesses and thinnesses, hitting and missing, pulling it down, pulling it across to just create some more shadow and texture for my beach. And then a clean damp brush run through underneath the headland and across the horizon line, just to keep that nice and flat, and helps to make it look as if the headland's going off a bit into the distance. And then more of that lovely mid-tone grey just dragged over the foreground beach, again to suggest texture, perspective, tone, all that sort of thing. I'm just trying to sort of build up a base for my beach, and then I can start going in and actually painting some rocks and stones in the foreground, but at the moment I'm just sort of setting the scene for it, so to speak. And I'm mixing up a slightly richer, darker mix of those 2 colours, so it comes out as a really nice dark blackish blue, and going to sweep in some sort of horizontal darkening shadows to sort of darken up and deepen this central area of the beach where I'm going to have my couple walking. and my rocks, of course. The rocks will come first. Just going backwards and forwards, making sure that everything as it dries is sort of drying the way I want it to. I can use my clean damp brush to sort of feather through any parts that are drying a bit hard or a bit harsh. I can drag a bit of paint around, or I can lift some out. So the flat brush is very, very versatile at this stage to give me texture and to build up just enough tone. I don't want too much tone in the distance though, because I want to use the paler colours to recede and to give me that distant look. And now, still using the flat brush, but using the tips and the corners, I'm going to start building up some rocks in the foreground using that nice dark blue, and I shall introduce some of the light red or Venetian red into those areas as well, and hopefully the colours will sort of blend out on the page and sort of give me all kinds of different blues, greys and sort of pinky maroon kind of tones and hues. Venetian red, like light red, is a very powerful colour. It can overwhelm if you're not careful, and I think I've got a bit too much on here, but I can dab some of that out in a bit. Just carefully going over those red areas with a tissue and just softening back a little bit. That's better. Now I'm going to introduce my third colour, which is Payne's Grey. Cotton Payne's Grey, when it's fresh out of the tube and only mixed with a little bit of water, is almost black. It's beautiful, and it kind of will split out to a very beautiful bluish grey. And if you use lots of water, it'll granulate and you'll get black and blue tones. So I'm using that lovely dark rich paint now to create my heavy strong rocks, my rock shadows, sort of some ripples in the water as well. Just making sure I'm keeping my rocks flat across the base and changing the size and the shape of them so that they kind of look like the random rocks that you see exposed by the low tide. I think my loose simple beach is nearly finished. I'm just going to use a clean damp small squirrel mop and soften back in some places, just maybe in the mid ground where there might be a little bit too much detail, and then using a tissue as well to sort of pull out any surplus paint that I can lift there. And I'm liking that a bit better now, and I'm just going to pick up a little bit more nice rich Payne's Grey on my flat brush and drop in just a few more darks so that foreground really pops. That should do. Stepping back now and looking at the painting, I think that now I've got the stronger rocks in the foreground, I need to very slightly darken up my headland. Not too much, I don't want it to be too strong, and it will dry back a bit lighter than this, but just going over it carefully with the flat brush to just give it a little bit more definition so it stands out a bit more from the beach. And now to paint my figures. I'm using my small calligraphy brush, but any small detail brush or maybe a small round with a good point is good for figure painting. And I've got a dark mixture of all three of my colours, and I'm working on just a loose, rough shape where I have two people walking side by side. So I've joined them, and I find that that actually makes for a really nice composition rather than two people very separately positioned. I think when we're just going to have one set of figures or one group of figures on the painting as the focal point, I think it adds to the relationship between the two, and it makes for a really nice painting. I'm just pulling down the legs and trying to make sure that I use brush strokes that are kind of going to indicate coats, heads, maybe a bag sticking out to one side, that sort of thing. Using a bit of tissue, I'm dabbing a bit of paint out of the coat of the figure on the right, and then I'll go back in with some light red so that would just add a little bit of sort of more colour to the figures, so they're not just a silhouette. There's going to be a little bit of colour and shade there. And then lastly, a little bit of reflection beneath their feet on the ground, just to sort of settle them onto the sand so that they look like they're grounded and walking on the sand and the shingle. And I think I'm quite happy with that. I'll remove the tape and see how it looks with its clean white border. Sometimes when you look at it without the tape, you get the chance to look at it with fresh eyes and you can see if it needs anything. A scene like this, of course, you could put more figures in, you could put boats in the distance, you could put birds in the sky. The possibilities again are pretty much just limited by your imagination for this sort of scene. And as I often say, these scenes can be very good practice for sky washes, rocks, things like that, and especially figures too. It's the ideal way to practice figures, which can be a bit tricky for beginners to start with. But always remember that if you have trouble to start with, the more you practice and the more you analyse what you think is not quite right with things like figures, and then put into practice what you've learnt, the faster you will progress. I think there's one thing that I want to do here. I think I want to darken up the legs of my figures slightly. So I've mixed up just Payne's Grey by itself, and I'm going to go over the legs. So starting from the coat, we go over the legs, and I think that just deepens the shadow a little bit more. And then make that bag a bit darker on that side that's sort of sticking out. And if anything gets too dark, you just gently touch it with a tissue and you take a bit of the paint off, and it also gives you a slightly sort of mottled look, which can look quite nice too. Maybe just darken up his hair a bit. And here's the finished painting. I think I forgot to tell you what paper, etc. I was using at the beginning, so I'll do that now. It's Saunders Waterford hot press paper. I chose hot press paper because it's lovely and smooth, and I wanted to see if I could practice getting a really smooth sky wash. It's taped to my board. My board was at an angle of about 45 degrees, and the tape is just ordinary decorator's masking tape. Well, I hope that was helpful. Please leave us a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thank you so much to my lovely Patreon group who support this channel. And I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.